Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that takes a whole stack of sources, pulls out the absolute core insights, and turns really complex topics into, well, stories you can actually follow.
And today, we are definitely plunging into a story. One that didn't just change Rome, it fundamentally altered the course of Western civilization. Its echoes are everywhere, our language, politics, how we even think about power.
We're kicking off with maybe the most infamous murder scene in history. Picture this: 23 stab wounds, the Ides of March, a man collapsing right at the foot of his dead rival's statue. Yeah, we're talking about Gaius Julius Caesar.
It's true. That assassination, it's often where the story ends for a lot of people. But our mission here in this deep dive is to go way beyond that. We really want to dig into how does a guy like Caesar, born into a respectable, but kind of fading noble family, how does he climb to this just unparalleled height of power?
Right. How does he basically oversee the transformation of a republic, struggling as it was, into the foundation for an empire, and leave this mark on the world that's still so, well, present?
Exactly. We need to dissect his genius, sure, but also his flaws, and maybe explore some of the surprising ways his story still feels relevant, even today.
And that's the plan. And to guide us, we've immersed ourselves in some really meticulous historical documentaries. They don't just trace his life and his incredible campaigns, but they analyze his legacy, which is just astonishingly persistent.
We're pulling out the most compelling bits, those aha moments,
Yeah.
basically giving you the shortcut to understanding this truly monumental figure and the world he completely dominates.
So let's start by painting a picture of that world. Where does Caesar even come from?
Okay, so to really get Caesar, you first have to get the Rome he was born into. We're talking late 2nd century, early 1st century BC. And Rome, it's already way more than just a city. It's a powerhouse.
Spreading out across the Mediterranean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Its influence is stretching everywhere, fueled by constant military wins and the wealth pouring back from conquered territories, Spain, Africa, the East. New provinces kept getting added, sending staggering resources back to the capital.
And Rome itself must have been buzzing, right? Transforming.
Oh, completely. Grand temples going up, new public spaces, forums for all the heated political debates, and these sprawling villas of the super rich families spreading across the hills. On the surface, you might think, wow, golden age, peak prosperity.
But there's always a but, isn't there? You said this prosperity had contradictions.
Huge contradictions, explosive ones, actually. All that gold from conquest. It massively widened the gap between the haves and have-nots. You had certain old patrician families and the equites, the sort of business class, the knights getting obscenely rich, snapping up huge amounts of land, building these enormous networks of clients who depended on them.
And the downside?
The downside was the backbone of the army, the small farmers, the guys who actually fought the wars. Many of them were falling into crippling debt, or worse, losing their family land altogether while they were away fighting. This created this deep, simmering resentment, a real fracture line running right through Roman society.
Okay, so you've got this powder keg of social tension, and then you throw in the politics, these two main factions, the optimates and the populares. What was the fundamental difference there?
Right, so the optimates, think of them as the establishment, the conservatives. They were all about upholding the Senate's traditional authority, the power of the old aristocratic families. They really distrusted anyone who appealed directly to the people, these sort of popular, charismatic figures. Keep power in the Senate, that was their mantra.
And the populares, they sound like the opposite.
Pretty much. As the name suggests, they championed the cause of the populace, the common people. They pushed for things like land redistribution, getting land back to those small farmers, ways to ease debt, giving the popular assemblies more say. They weren't afraid to challenge the Senate, often using the tribunes of the plebs.
Those were the officials elected to protect the commoners, right? They had veto power.
Exactly. They could veto Senate decrees, propose their own laws, so the popularist leaders would use the tribunes to bypass the Senate conservatives. And these weren't just polite disagreements, These rivalries often pitted the most powerful families against each other, leading to real political violence, instability. It was intense.
So the streets of Rome must have been quite a scene. Triumphs, debates, but also anxiety.
Absolutely. Picture it. You've got generals coming back, putting on these spectacular triumphs. Crowds are dazzled by the spoils of war, exotic animals, prisoners in chains. Pure spectacle. New buildings are going up, religious festivals marking the calendar.
Sounds impressive.
It was. But underneath, there was this constant hum of anxiety. People in the markets and the taverns, they're whispering about the latest Senate row, the new land law being debated, which ambitious politician is making moves. And the huge issue is the veterans. Guys come back after years fighting for Rome.
Expecting their promised plot of land.
Right. And often they didn't get it, or they got bogged down in bureaucracy, and they became easy targets for politicians who'd promised them land in exchange for their loyalty, their votes, basically turning them into personal armies. It was a really dangerous dynamic.
And the whole system itself, the republic structure, it wasn't really built for running an empire, was it?
That's a key point. It was designed for a city-state. Now it's trying to govern this vast, diverse territory. So you have laws clashing, vetoes flying back and forth, alliances made in secret deals, broken just as quickly. People look at their leaders, sometimes with admiration, often with deep suspicion. Could you trust their promises? Or was it all just self-interest? The fear of civil war wasn't abstract. It felt like it could erupt any minute. And sometimes it did.
And it's into this Rome buzzing, wealthy, powerful, but also deeply divided and unstable that Gaius Julius Caesar is born, around 100 BC.
Exactly. Into this boiling pot. His family name, the Julii, was prestigious, but maybe not at the absolute peak of influence right then. Nobody, absolutely nobody, would have guessed this kid would one day command legions that would conquer half the known world, rewrite Rome's rules, and basically set it on the path to empire.
Let's talk about that family, the gens Julia. They had a pretty special claim to fame, didn't they? Almost mythical.
Oh, definitely. They claimed direct descent from Icelus, who was the son of Aeneas.
The Trojan hero who fled Troy and supposedly founded the Roman lineage.
Right. And Aeneas himself was supposedly the son of the goddess Venus. So the Julii are claiming divine ancestry. That's a huge deal in Roman society. It gives them this aura, this inherent prestige, even if by the 1st century BC, they weren't maybe the richest or most politically dominant family compared to some others.
So a glorious past, but maybe needing a bit of a boost in the present.
That's a good way to put it. Caesar's father, also Gaius Julius Caesar, was a respected senator, but he never reached the absolute top office, the consulship. The ambition was definitely there, though, to restore the family's full glory. And he passed that ambition on to his son.
Caesar grows up near the Forum, right in the thick of things. What was his education like? It wasn't just reading and writing, was it?
No, it was the full patrician package. Reading, writing, yes, but heavily focused on Greek culture. You had to know Greek. Greek tutors taught him rhetoric, the art of persuasion, which was absolutely crucial for anyone wanting a public career. Making speeches in the Forum, swaying the crowds. That was key.
And he was interested in figures like Alexander the Great early on.
Very much so. That fascination with Alexander, the sheer scale of his conquests, seems to have lodged in Caesar's mind from a young age. It became this benchmark, almost an obsession later on.
And his mother, Aurelia, she seems to come across as a pretty formidable figure.
Absolutely. Ancient sources describe her as wise, sharp, the model Roman matron. She closely supervised his education. And her influence became even more critical because Caesar's father died quite suddenly, maybe a seizure, when Caesar was only about 15 or 16.
So she really shaped his early political understanding.
It seems so. She grounded him in tradition, the importance of alliances, but also seems to have encouraged a certain boldness, knowing when to push the boundaries, a really crucial figure in his youth.
And what a youth it was. He's growing up witnessing these brutal power struggles, Marius versus Sulla.
Exactly. Marius, his uncle by marriage, the great general who reformed the army and made soldiers loyal to him personally, not just the state.
Yeah.
And Sulla, the champion of the optimates, the Senate conservatives, who fiercely resisted Marius. These were just political debates. They turned into actual civil wars, with purges, assassinations, incredible violence.
Sulla's prescriptions, those lists of enemies to be killed, that must have been terrifying.
Utterly terrifying. And the Julia family, because of the Marius connection, was in real danger. So young Caesar learns very harsh lessons very early. How power shifts brutally, the need for strong alliances, constant vigilance, a bit of cunning diplomacy, and when to be bold. It was like a political survival course in real time.
What about the story of him being born by cesarean section? Is there any truth to that?
Almost certainly not. Historians are pretty skeptical. Back then, that procedure was incredibly rare on a living woman, and usually fatal for the mother. We know Aurelia, his mother, was alive and well decades later.
So where did the story come from?
Probably later propaganda, either playing on his name Caesar, which might derive from Caesus, meaning cut, or just trying to add to his larger-than-life, almost supernatural image. It makes for a good story, but likely just that.
Any other interesting tidbits from his childhood? Legends, or maybe more grounded stories?
Well, There are accounts emphasizing Aurelia's skill in managing the household, protecting the family's interest, maybe even warning young Caesar about Sulla. The family also likely performed specific religious rites linked to their Venus ancestry. Caesar later made a big deal of building a temple to Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother, connecting himself directly to that divine lineage.
And even as a kid, he was apparently quite inquisitive.
Yeah, stories suggest he had this sharp mind, wasn't afraid to question adults about politics or Roman customs. That natural curiosity, combined with the rigorous training and rhetoric, really set the stage for him becoming a powerful speaker in the forum. Before the general, there was the orator.
Okay, fast forward a bit. It's 82 BC. Sulla has won the civil war, he's dictator, and Rome is under his thumb. Caesar is about 18. Things look pretty dangerous for him, right?
Extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
Sulla is purging anyone connected to Marius. And Caesar is not only Marius's nephew by marriage, he's also married to Cornelia, who is the daughter of Cinna, another major enemy of Sulla. So he's doubly suspect.
And Sulla puts him to the test.
He does. Sulla orders Caesar to divorce Cornelia, to break that tie to the Marian faction. It's a loyalty test, basically. And incredibly, Caesar, still just a teenager really, refuses, flat out refuses.
Wow. Knowing the risk, Sulla could have had him killed instantly.
Easily. He was risking everything, his property, his life. It showed incredible strength of character, or maybe a sheer stubbornness and pride right from the start. He wouldn't compromise his principles or his loyalty to his wife.
And Sulla's reaction, there's that famous quote.
Right. Sulla, recognizing this dangerous mix of ambition and defiance, supposedly said something like, "Beware of this boy in the loose toga. In this young man there are many Mariuses." He saw the potential threat, the same kind of popular appeal and ambition that Marius had possessed.
So Caesar had to get out of Rome.
He had to flee, yeah. Went into hiding, relied on friends and family. This whole experience, this brush with death, was incredibly formative. He learned about betrayal, how power can turn on a dime, and the absolute necessity of building your own network, your own base of support.
Yeah.
It hardened him and probably strengthened that sense of destiny he seemed to carry.
Once things cooled down a bit after Sulla, what was his next move? He starts his public career.
Yes, he immediately dives into the cursus honorum, the traditional path of offices. His first significant role was as a military tribune in Asia Minor. This wasn't just a desk job. He's getting hands-on experience commanding troops, dealing with logistics, diplomacy on the ground. It's where he starts building that rapport with soldiers, learning how to motivate them through, fairness, firmness, laying the groundwork for the incredible loyalty he'd later inspire.
And then comes a pirate story. This one is almost too good to be true. 75 BC.
It's a classic. He's sailing, gets captured by Cilician pirates, notorious bunch back then. They demand a ransom, 20 talents of silver. And Caesar, instead of being terrified, supposedly laughs at them.
Laughs.
Yeah, basically tells them they're undervaluing him. He insists they demand 50 talents. He felt he was worth more.
That takes some serious nerve.
Unbelievable nerve. And during his captivity, which lasted over a month, he acts less like a prisoner and more like their commander. He tells them when to be quiet so he can sleep or write, joins in their exercises, recites poetry to them, and apparently jokes with them that he'll come back and crucify them all once he's free.
And they just thought he was kidding, some arrogant Roman noble.
Presumably. They laughed it off. Big mistake. Because Caesar never joked about his dignitas, his honor, his standing. The minute that ransom, the 50 talents he insisted on was paid and he was released, what does he do?
He goes after them.
Immediately. Raises a small fleet, hunts them down, captures the lot of them, and then he crucifies them, just like he promised. Although, supposedly, as a sign of mercy, because they'd treated him relatively well, he had their throats cut first before nailing them up.
Chilling. But what a statement.
Exactly. It wasn't just revenge. It was a message. To Rome, to everyone. This is Julius Caesar. He has wit, he has courage, but cross him. Disrespect his dignitas, and he will deliver on his threats. It massively boosted his reputation as a man of action, not just talk. Cemented the legend.
So after pirates and military service, his political career starts gathering serious steam. Quaestor next.
Quaestor in 69 BC, yes. That's the first major step on the official ladder. He gets posted to Hispania Ulterior, further Spain. This is a big deal. He's managing provincial finances, administering a large territory, making crucial connections with the local Roman and native elites. Spain was becoming heavily Romanized, a real power base.
And this is where the famous encounter with the statue of Alexander the Great happens?
That's the story. He's in Cadiz, sees the statue of Alexander, and reportedly just bursts into tears. He's overcome with shame.
Shame. Why?
Because he realized Alexander had conquered most of the known world by the time he was Caesar's age, around 31 or 32. And Caesar felt he'd achieved, well, relatively little in comparison. Just a few minor offices, some speeches. He felt like a failure next to his hero.
But that didn't make him give up.
Quite the opposite. For Caesar, that kind of feeling was pure motivation. It wasn't despair, it was fuel. He apparently resolved right then and there to inscribe his name in history whatever the cost, to surpass even Alexander. While he was in Spain, he did show real administrative skill, gained popularity locally, got a handle on finance. He was learning the ropes of governing.
So when he comes back to Rome, he's got military experience, administrative experience, and this burning ambition. How does he translate that into power back in the capital?
He knew the game. He needed public visibility, popular support, and powerful allies. So he starts organizing these incredibly lavish public games, gladiators, chariot races, huge spectacles. Finance how? Often by borrowing enormous sums of money.
Taking on massive debt.
Huge debt. But it paid off in popularity. The crowds loved him for it. He understood the bread and circuses principle perfectly. Give the people entertainment, generosity, and they'll remember you.
And alliances, marriage played a role again.
Absolutely. After Cornelia died, he married Pompeia, then later Calpurnia. These weren't just love matches. They were strategic moves to connect with powerful families, gain access to influential circles. Marriage was a key political tool in Rome.
And he starts positioning himself as a champion of the people, following in Marius's footsteps.
Very much so. He consciously cultivated that image, leveraged his family's divine lineage, sure, but also took strong public stances defending the plebes, the common people. He inherited Marius's populist mantle, maybe more subtly at first, but clearly signaling his direction. His speeches in the Forum were becoming legendary, persuasive, eloquent, really connecting with the ordinary Romans, and definitely unsettling the conservative old guard.
And all this time, he's racking up these huge debts. You mentioned Crassus earlier.
Yeah. Marcus Licinius Crassus, reputedly the richest man in Rome. He bankrolled a lot of Caesar's early career. There was definitely an understanding, almost certainly unspoken, that when Caesar eventually got a provincial governorship with opportunities for, shall we say, revenue generation, Crassus would get his money back with interest. It was high-stakes political investment.
Then in 63 BC, he makes a really bold move running for Pontifex Maximus.
A massive gamble. This wasn't a political job with armies, but the chief priest of Rome. A lifetime appointment, hugely prestigious, came with a house in the Forum, immense influence over religious life, which was deeply intertwined with politics. He was young, heavily in debt, considered an outsider against more established candidates.
But he won.
He won. Spent a fortune campaigning, bribing probably, but he pulled it off. It was a stunning victory. Gave him immense religious authority to add to his growing political clout. A masterstroke.
So by the early 60s BC, Caesar's star is definitely rising, but Rome is dominated by two giants, right? Pompey and Crassus.
Absolutely. Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great, basking in the glory of his military victories in the East, incredibly popular, wealthy from his campaigns. And Crassus, with his almost unimaginable wealth, from property speculation, financing, you name it. Caesar is making waves, but he's not quite in their league yet, individually.
And the Senate is still stuck, wary of these powerful figures.
Deeply wary. Paralyzed by infighting, terrified of another Sulla or Marius, resistant to any real changes that might upset the old order. Pompey, for instance, couldn't get the Senate to formally approve the arrangements he'd made in the East or grant land to his veterans. They were deliberately blocking him. Crassus, too, had financial interests he needed the Senate to support, and they were dragging their feet.
So Caesar sees an opportunity here. These powerful men are frustrated with the Senate.
Exactly. Caesar, the ultimate strategist, realizes they all have a common problem. The obstructionist Senate. Pompey needs his settlements ratified. Crassus needs favorable financial legislation. Caesar needs a major military command to build his own Pompey-level glory and pay off those debts. They're all being stymied.
So he brokers a deal, the first triumvirate.
Precisely. In the summer of 60 BC, he quietly proposes this informal, private alliance. It's not official, not a public office, just a secret pact between the three of them. Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar will help each other get what we want.
How did they seal it?
Caesar became consul in 59 BC, largely thanks to their backing. And crucially, he arranged for his daughter, Julia, whom he adored, to marry Pompey. This family tie was meant to cement the alliance, build trust. It created this incredibly powerful bloc operating outside the formal Republican structures.
And what did each of them get out of it?
Pompey got Caesar's help as consul to push through the ratification of his eastern settlements and land for his veterans, vital for keeping his soldiers loyal. Crassus got laws passed that benefited his business network, especially tax breaks for the companies collecting taxes in the provinces. And Caesar, he got what he desperately wanted, the governorship of Gaul, Cisalpine, and Transalpine plus Illyricum for a long term. His launch pad for military glory and immense wealth.
And initially, this triumvirate, it worked.
Yeah, for a few years it seemed to function. Caesar heads off to Gaul in 58 BC and starts his incredible run of victories, campaign after campaign. He's sending back reports, gaining prestige, building this fiercely loyal army. Pompey stays mostly in Rome, overseeing the land distribution, managing things there. Crassus focuses on his finances and starts planning his own grand military adventure, an expedition against Parthia in the east. He wanted military glory, too.
But alliances built on convenience, they don't always last, do they? Cracks started appearing.
Pretty quickly. By 56 BC, tensions were rising. Pompey, back in Rome, starts getting nervous about just how successful Caesar is being in Gaul. All that power, all that loyalty Caesar's building, it's starting to look a bit threatening. They had meetings like the one at Lucca to try and patch things up, reaffirm the deal, but the foundation was shaky. It was always about self-interest.
And then things really started to unravel, tragically with Julia's death.
Yes, that was a huge blow. Caesar's daughter, Pompey's wife Julia, died in childbirth in 54 BC. She seems to have been a genuine bond between the two men, a sort of personal link softening their rivalry. When she died, that connection was gone. The political tensions became much sharper.
And then Crassus's disaster in the east.
The final nail in the triumvirate's coffin. In 53 BC, Crassus leads his army against the Parthians, seeking that military glory he craved. It ends in utter catastrophe at the Battle of Carrhae. Crassus is killed, his army is annihilated, Roman standards are captured. It's a massive humiliation for Rome.
So no more Crassus to balance things out, just Caesar and Pompey left.
Exactly. The three-legged stool collapses. Now it's just these two titans, their ambitions set on a collision course. Pompey, without the family tie to Caesar and increasingly worried about Caesar's power, drifts firmly into the camp of the conservative Senate, the optimates. Caesar, finishing up in Gaul, watches events in Rome with growing alarm. The path to open conflict, to civil war, is now wide open. The triumvirate, meant to solve the Republic's problems, ultimately just highlighted its fatal weaknesses.
So 58 BC, Caesar gets his governorship. Gaul. This wasn't just a quiet administrative posting, was it? This was his chance for glory.
Absolutely. Cisalpine Gaul, northern Italy, Transalpine Gaul, roughly southern France, and Illyricum, the Balkan coast. He specifically wanted Transalpine Gaul because it was this vast, volatile region, long-haired Gaul, they called it. Lots of different Celtic tribes, often fighting each other, plus the constant threat of Germanic tribes pushing across the Rhine.
So there were built-in excuses for military intervention.
Perfect justifications. Migrating tribes like the Helvetii moving westwards, supposedly threatening Roman allies or Roman territory. Germanic warlords like Ariovistus crossing the Rhine. Caesar could present himself as Rome's protector, the man bringing stability to the frontier while actually pursuing a policy of aggressive conquest. It was brilliant political maneuvering combined with military ambition.
His first big moves were against the Helvetii and Ariovistus.
Yes, right, in 58 BC. He confronts the Helvetii, nearby Bracht, wins a decisive victory, immediately establishes himself as a serious commander. Then he turns on Ariovistus, who had been encroaching on Gaulish territory, drives the Germans back across the Rhine. 2 major victories in his first year. His reputation in Rome skyrockets. He's the man holding back the barbarian hordes.
And over the next few years, he just keeps going, pushing deeper into Gaul.
Systematically. He campaigns against the Belgae in the north, supposedly the toughest warriors. He uses complex tactics, builds fortifications, and crucially plays the tribes off against each other. He allies with some, fights others. In 56 BC, he takes on the Veneti, these seafaring people on the Atlantic coast. He has to build a special fleet to beat them. Shows his adaptability.
This strategy of divide and conquer, he was a master at it.
A complete master. He'd support one tribe against another, act as an arbiter in their disputes, then turn them into Roman clients. He allied strongly with tribes like the Aedui, making their rivals jealous and easier to isolate. It was incredibly effective, expanding Roman influence sometimes without even needing a major battle.
And his engineering skills were legendary too. That bridge over the Rhine.
Oh yeah, that's iconic. Built a massive wooden bridge over the Rhine River in just 10 days. An incredible feat of engineering. It wasn't just practical, it was a statement. Look what Rome can do, we can cross anywhere. He marched his army across, made a show of force on German soil, then marched back and dismantled the bridge. Pure psychological warfare.
But the Gauls didn't just roll over. There was major resistance, wasn't there? Vercingetorix.
Absolutely.
Nah.
By 52 BC, the Gauls finally started to unite under this charismatic leader, Vercingetorix of the Arverni tribe. He was smart. He used scorched earth tactics, burning crops and villages to deny supplies to Caesar's legions. It culminates in the epic siege of Alesia.
And Alicia, that's the one with the double walls.
That's the one. Vercingetorix holds up in this strongly fortified hilltop town, Alesia. He's waiting for a huge Gallic relief army to arrive and crush Caesar from the outside. Caesar's response is astonishing military engineering. He builds one line of fortifications facing inwards to blockade Alesia, and another massive line facing outwards to defend against the expected relief force. He's basically besieging the town while simultaneously preparing to be besieged himself.
And it worked.
It worked. The Gallic relief army arrived, attacked Caesar's outer wall. Vercingetorix attacked from the inside. Brutal fighting. But Caesar's lines held. Eventually, starving and seeing the relief army defeated, Vercingetorix surrendered, rode out in his finest armor, threw his weapons at Caesar's feet. A really poignant moment.
Caesar's accounts, his commentaries, boast about killing 1 million Gauls and slaving another 1 million. Was it really that brutal?
The scale was immense. Archaeology backs up accounts of massacres, men, women, children killed after battles or sieges. Some modern historians don't hesitate to use the word genocide. It was incredibly violent, a war of conquest with devastating consequences for the Gallic population.
Yet we also hear about Caesar showing clemency, mercy. How does that fit?
It was calculated mercy. If a tribe surrendered quickly or offered allegiance, Caesar might spare them, leave their local leaders in place, integrate them as Roman allies or clients. It was pragmatic, cheaper and more effective in the long run than trying to rule purely by force everywhere. Keep the local structures, tax them, draw recruits from them. It was a way to build loyalty, or at least compliance, strategic kindness, you might say.
And those commentaries on the Gallic War, they weren't just straightforward reports, were they?
Oh, not at all. They are masterpieces of Latin prose, yes, but they also brilliant propaganda. Written by Caesar himself, sent back to Roman installments. He's shaping the narrative in real time. Everything is presented from his perspective, justifying his actions, highlighting his successes, portraying himself as the indispensable defender of Rome.
Written in that famous third-person style, Caesar did this.
Exactly. It gives this air of objectivity, detachment, perfect for being read aloud in the forum, influencing public opinion back home. Think of it like perfectly crafted press releases or a really effective social media campaign today. He knew how to manage his image.
And he coined some unforgettable phrases. Vini, vidi, vici.
I came, I saw, I conquered. The ultimate soundbite. After a quick victory later on, but it sums up the image he cultivated from Gaul. Short, punchy, conveys absolute dominance. Genius PR. He got unprecedented honors in Rome, like 15 days of public thanksgiving, but some senators were horrified, demanding he be prosecuted for attacking allies without Senate approval. He was deeply divisive even then.
What about the expeditions to Britain, 55 and 54 BC? What was the point of those?
Multiple motivations, probably. Extend his command, maybe.
Yeah.
Tap into perceived wealth. Britain was rumored to have gold, silver, pearls. But mostly, it seems like a massive PR stunt. Conquering this mysterious island at the edge of the known world. It was like Rome's moon landing. Huge prestige factor.
Was it successful? Did he conquer Britain?
Not really. He faced terrible weather, logistical problems, tough resistance from the Britons with their famous war chariots. He landed, fought some battles, imposed a tribute, which was probably never paid consistently, took some hostages and left. No permanent occupation. That wouldn't happen for another century. But he got incredible publicity back in Rome. And his writings give us the first real descriptions of the island and his people. The Blee war paint, the chariots, all that.
So by the end of the Gallic Wars, Caesar has achieved his goals. Glory, wealth, a loyal army.
Absolutely, on a scale few could have imagined. He'd added a vast territory to Rome, secured immense resources. He'd paid off his enormous debts through plunder and tribute. He built an incredibly experienced, battle-hardened army that was fiercely loyal to him personally because he shared the spoils, looked after them, promoted based on merit. That army was now his ultimate power base. And his prestige in Rome, despite the controversy, was immense. He was ready for the next act.
Which brings us to the brink, 49 BC. The triumvirate is dead. Pompey has sided with the Senate, and they want Caesar to give up his army and come home.
Yes, the optimates in the Senate, led by hardliners like Cato the Younger, are determined to bring Caesar down. They see him as a threat to the Republic itself. They demand he disband his legions, return to Rome as a private citizen privatus, where he would immediately lose his legal immunity and face prosecution for supposed crimes during his consulship and his command in Gaul.
It sounds like a trap.
It was absolutely intended to neutralize him. Pompey, now allied with the Senate, is given emergency powers to defend the Republic, essentially, to use force against Caesar if necessary.
So Caesar has this impossible choice. Go back, lose everything, face trial, or fight.
Exactly. His dignitas, his honor, his standing, everything he'd fought for was on the line. Returning meant humiliation and probable political destruction. The alternative, marching his army into Italy, which was explicitly illegal, an act of treason, effectively declaring war on the state.
And he's at the Rubicon River, the
Yeah.
boundary,
Yeah.
early 49 BC. He's in Cisalpine Gaul, his province. The Rubicon River marks the border with Italy proper. Roman law was crystal clear. No general could cross that border with troops under arms without Senate permission. It was the point of no return. Sources say he hesitated, agonized over the decision for hours, pacing the riverbank, knowing what it meant.
And then, alea iacta est. The die is cast. He gives the order, leads his 13th legion across the little river. It might have been a small stream, but symbolically it was immense. He'd crossed the line, there was no going back. Civil war was inevitable.
How did Rome react?
Panic. Utter panic in the Senate. They gave Pompey full authority. But something unexpected happened. As Caesar marched south through Italy, many towns just opened their gates to him. They didn't resist. Some people were tired of the Senate's infighting, maybe saw Caesar as a reformer, or were just impressed by the conqueror of Gaul.
So Pompey couldn't stop him in Italy.
No. Pompey realized he couldn't raise a reliable army quickly enough in Italy. Enthusiasm for the Senate's cause was lukewarm, so he made a strategic decision. Abandon Rome, abandon Italy, and sail east to Greece. Take the experienced legion stationed there, raise more troops, use the vast resources of the eastern provinces, and fight Caesar on his own terms later.
So Caesar takes Rome without a fight.
Takes Rome without a fight. A huge psychological victory for Caesar, a blow for Pompey. But it also meant the war wasn't over. It had just shifted location.
That phrase, alea iacta est, did he actually say it? Or is it like the cherry tree story with Washington?
Huh. Well, ancient historians like Suetonius and Plutarch report it. Whether those were the exact words or spoken exactly then, who knows? It might have been refined later for dramatic effect. It's such a perfect line for the moment. Some sources even suggest he might have said it in Greek, and eriphtho kibos, let the dice be thrown, which would fit his education. And of course, legends popped up about omens, dreams, supernatural signs around the crossing. It shows how momentous people felt it was.
So the Civil War begins in earnest. Where's the main showdown?
After chasing Pompey around for a bit, the decisive battle happens in 48 BC, in Greece, on the plain of Pharsalus. Pompey has more men, maybe twice as many, and controls the sea. Caesar's troops are veterans, incredibly disciplined, but outnumbered and running low on supplies.
How did Caesar win against those odds?
Tactical genius. Pompey planned to use his superior cavalry to smash Caesar's right flank. Caesar anticipated this. He secretly detached a few elite cohorts, his reserves, and hid them behind his main line on that flank. When Pompey's cavalry charged, expecting an easy victory, Caesar's hidden troops attacked them head-on, using their javelins like spears, aiming for the faces of the horsemen.
Ouch. Effective.
Devastatingly effective. Pompey's cavalry, mostly young nobles unused to such brutal close-quarters fighting, panicked and fled. This left Pompey's infantry flank exposed. Caesar ordered his main line forward, his reserves hit the flank, and Pompey's whole army just disintegrated. Pompey himself fled the field, a total rout.
Where did Pompey flee to?
He headed for Egypt. He thought the young king, Ptolemy III, owed him favors and would give him refuge, maybe help him regroup. Big mistake.
What happened in Egypt?
When Caesar arrived in Alexandria shortly after Pompey, pursuing him, he was presented with Pompey's severed head, a gruesome welcome gift from Ptolemy's advisors, hoping to curry favor with the winner.
How did Caesar react? Was he pleased his rival was gone?
Reportedly, he was horrified, disgusted, maybe even shed tears. Pompey was his enemy, yes, but also a great Roman, his former son-in-law. To be murdered so treacherously by foreigners, it offended Caesar's Roman sensibilities. He might have wanted Pompey captured, perhaps pardoned, certainly not assassinated like that.
And this leads to his involvement in Egyptian politics, the whole Cleopatra story.
Exactly. He gets drawn into the power struggle between young Ptolemy XIII and his older sister, Cleopatra. They're both vying for the throne. Caesar ends up siding with Cleopatra. She was intelligent, charismatic, and he probably saw her as a more reliable ally for Rome. This leads to the Alexandrian War, where Caesar and a small force are actually besieged in the royal palace for a while. He eventually wins, defeats Ptolemy, who drowns in the Nile, and puts Cleopatra firmly on the throne.
And during his stay, the famous affair begins.
Yes. He spends several months in Egypt, well into 47 BC. Famously, he takes that Nile cruise with Cleopatra. It was clearly a political alliance, securing Egypt's wealth and grain supply for Rome, but by all accounts, there was genuine chemistry, a real relationship there too. And it resulted in a son, Caesarion.
Which must have caused quite a stir back in Rome.
Oh, definitely. A Roman leader having a child with a foreign queen, especially one as famously alluring as Cleopatra. It was scandalous to conservative Romans. More fuel for his enemies later.
After Egypt, does he mop up the remaining resistance?
Pretty quickly. He heads to Asia Minor, crushes Pharnaces II, son of Rome's old enemy Mithridates, at the Battle of Zela. That's when he sends the famous message, Veni Vidi Vici, just highlighting the speed and ease of his victory.
But there were still Pompey supporters holding out.
Yes, a determined group of senators and generals, including Cato the Younger, had regrouped in North Africa. Caesar confronts them at the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC. Another decisive Caesarian victory. Many of the leaders, including Cato, chose suicide rather than surrender to Caesar. They saw him as a tyrant and wouldn't live under his rule.
Oh, final battle.
The last major fight was at Munda in Spain in 45 BC against Pompey's sons, Gnaeus and Sextus. This was apparently one of Caesar's toughest battles. He supposedly had to rally his troops personally at one point, but he won, crushing the last organized resistance. Sextus Pompey escaped, would cause trouble later, but the civil war was effectively over.
So Caesar returns to Rome, victorious everywhere. What happens next? He's the undisputed master.
Undisputed master. He stages these incredible triumphs, 4 of them, back to back, celebrating victories over Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, Zela, and Africa, Thapsus. Carefully not celebrating victories over fellow Romans, of course. These were massive spectacles showcasing loot, captives, elephants, and emphasizing his supposed clemency, his forgiveness of former enemies. Pure political theater to consolidate his power and image.
And then comes the ultimate step, dictator for life.
In February 44 BC, he accepts the title Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in Perpetuity, Dictator for life. This was the final break with Republican tradition. Dictatorships were supposed to be temporary, 6 months max, for emergencies. This was permanent. He was also accumulating other offices, consul repeatedly, control over provinces, Pontifex Maximus, all power concentrated in one man. He was king in all but name.
Did he try to reform Rome with this power? Or just enjoy it?
Oh, he definitely launched major reforms. He tackled the Senate first, expanded it significantly from around 600 to 900 members, brought in his own supporters, yes, but also provincial elites, even some Gauls.
How did the old senators feel about that?
The conservatives were horrified, saw it as diluting Roman identity, packing the Senate with his cronies. Others maybe saw it as necessary modernization, making the Senate more representative of the empire Rome now ruled. Either way, the Senate basically became a rubber stamp for Caesar's decisions.
What other big reforms did he push through? The calendar.
The Julian calendar, a huge one. Introduced in 46 BC, Roman calendar had become a mess, totally out of sync with the seasons. He brought in astronomers, probably from Egypt, thanks to Cleopatra, and instituted the 365-day year with a leap day every 4 years. It was so accurate it lasted, with minor tweaks, for 1,600 years. A massive practical achievement. And naming the month Quintilis after himself, July, didn't hurt his legacy either. Someone joked he'd be ordering the stars around next.
He also addressed land and debt issues, things the populares had always pushed for.
Yes, big time. He enacted laws to distribute public land to his veterans and to poor citizens, a hugely popular move, fulfilling that long-standing demand. He also tackled the chronic problem of debt, trying to regulate interest rates, offering some debt relief. Unpopular with the wealthy lenders, naturally, but very popular with ordinary people. He also reorganized local governments in Italy and the provinces, trying to bring more order and efficiency.
Was he content with ruling Rome, or did he have further ambitions, more conquests?
He was already planning his next big thing, a massive campaign against Parthia, to avenge Crassus's defeat at Carrhae, regain the lost standards, and push Rome's frontiers even further east. He was consciously modeling himself on Alexander the Great, aiming for world conquest. He was also founding new colonies across the empire, settling veterans, spreading Roman influence. He never seemed to stop.
How did he manage his public image during this time? He seemed like a master of propaganda.
An absolute master, revolutionary really. He started putting his own portrait on Roman coins while he was still alive. That was basically unheard of for a Roman. It meant his face was literally in everyone's pocket, every day.
Statues, too.
Statues everywhere, in Rome and provincial cities, often with titles like Father of the Fatherland or Savior. He funded lavish public entertainment, those huge games, massive public feasts, gladiators, classic bread and circuses to keep the population happy and loyal. He understood mass psychology.
What about this idea of him wanting to be a god or a king? Was that real?
It's complicated. He certainly allowed, even encouraged, honors that bordered on the divine. As Pontifex Maximus, he controlled state religion. He constantly emphasized his descent from Venus. Temples were dedicated in his honor. Did he actually believe he was divine? Probably not. Did he want the status? Very possibly.
The kingship thing seems even more sensitive for Romans. Did he want to be king?
That's the million denarius question. Romans had this deep, almost pathological hatred of kings ever since they kicked out their last one centuries before. Caesar publicly, dramatically refused a diadem or royal crown when Mark Antony offered it to him at a festival. The crowd cheered his refusal.
So maybe he didn't want it.
Or maybe it was a calculated performance, testing the waters. Rumors persisted that he planned to declare himself king, maybe rule from Alexandria with Cleopatra, or come back crowned after the Parthian War. His enemies certainly believed he aimed for monarchy. Even his own soldiers had nicknames for him, like the bald adulterer, showing a certain lack of reverence, though they were loyal. They knew his flaws.
So despite the reforms and the popularity with the masses, serious opposition was building among the elite.
Deep opposition. Among the old aristocratic families, the committed republicans, the fear of monarchy was genuine and profound. They saw Caesar accumulating titles, accepting near-divine honors, treating the Senate with perceived contempt, sometimes literally not even standing up when senators approached him. That was a huge insult. They felt their republic was being destroyed. The Senate felt powerless, just rubber-stamping his decrees.
And the whispers started. Plots.
Conspiratorial whispers grew louder, talk of tyranny, claims he was mocking the old Constitution. Senators started meeting in secret, wondering if the only way to save the republic was assassination.
Which leads us to the Ides of March. Who were the main players in the conspiracy?
A core group of about 60 senators were in on it, but the key leaders were Gaius Cassius Longinus, a capable general who felt personally slighted by Caesar and Marcus Junius Brutus.
Brutus is the famous one. Why him? He owed Caesar a lot, didn't he?
He did. Caesar had pardoned him after Pharsalus, gave him important positions. There seemed to have been real affection there. But Brutus came from a family famous for founding the Republic, for driving out the kings. He felt this immense weight of ancestry, this duty to Republican ideals. Cassius seems to have been motivated more by personal resentment, but Brutus wrestled with it. Loyalty to Caesar versus loyalty to the Republic. Ultimately, the Republic won out for him. Decimus Brutus, another close friend and general of Caesar's, was also crucial in persuading Caesar to go to the Senate that day.
What was their plan? To restore the Republic by killing the perceived tyrant?
That was the idea. Kill Caesar, declare liberty restored, and hope the Senate and people would rally back to the old ways. It was incredibly risky. They knew Caesar was popular, and his veterans were fiercely loyal. Killing him could easily lead to chaos, not liberty.
They chose the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC. Why then and there?
It was a Senate meeting day scheduled to be held in the Theater of Pompey complex, ironically, built by Caesar's dead rival. Caesar would be there, in his toga, unarmed, and crucially, without a large military escort inside the Senate House itself. The plan was simple. Approach him as if presenting a petition, then attack all at once. Overwhelm him.
Were there warnings, omens? The stories are famous.
Loads of them, according to later accounts. The soothsayer warning him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar supposedly joked on the day, "The Ides of March have come," and the soothsayer replied, "I, Caesar, but not yet gone." His wife Calpurnia supposedly had nightmares, begged him not to go. He hesitated.
But he went anyway.
Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, came to his house and persuaded him not to disappoint the Senate, not to look weak or superstitious. There's even a story someone tried to hand him a note revealing the plot, but he didn't read it. Whether these stories are true or later embellishments, they add to the drama.
So he arrives at the Senate. What happens then?
The conspirators gather around him. One of them, Tullius Cimber, grabs his toga, pulling it down as the signal. Then Casca strikes the first blow, a glancing one to the neck or shoulder. Caesar turns, maybe tries to defend himself, supposedly stabbed Casca's arm with his stylus. But then the others surge in, a frenzy of stabbing, up to 23 wounds reported.
And the legendary last words, "Et tu, Brute."
"You too, Brutus," possibly said when he saw Brutus among the assassins. Suetonius reports it, though others don't. Whether he said those exact words or perhaps something in Greek or nothing at all, we'll never know for sure. But the image is incredibly powerful. He collapses, bleeding to death, right at the base of Pompey's statue. The ultimate irony.
What happened immediately after? Did the Republic spring back to life?
Chaos. Panic among the senators who weren't involved. The assassins stood there, daggers dripping, shouting, "Six Semper Tyrannis," or "Liberty!" But they hadn't really planned for the aftermath. The Roman people were stunned, shocked, and increasingly angry. They loved Caesar, benefited from his generosity. They weren't celebrated.
And Mark Antony stepped in.
Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal right-hand man, seized the moment. At Caesar's public funeral a few days later, he gave this incredibly clever, incendiary speech. Didn't directly attack the assassins at first, but praised Caesar, read his will, which left money and gardens to the people of Rome, and then dramatically revealed Caesar's bloody toga, pointing out the stab wound.
Inciting the crowd.
Totally. The crowd went wild, turned into an angry mob, hunted for the assassins who had to flee Rome. They built a makeshift funeral pyre for Caesar right there in the Forum, burning his body in a massive outpouring of grief and rage. The dream of restoring the old republic died right there with Caesar.
So the assassination didn't save the Republic, it just triggered more chaos.
Exactly. It unleashed another round of brutal civil wars. And Caesar's will contained a bombshell. He named his young grandnephew, Octavian, as his primary heir. Adopted him posthumously.
Octavian. He was only 19. Nobody really knew him.
Right. But suddenly, he inherits Caesar's vast fortune and, crucially, his name. Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He becomes the focus for Caesarian loyalty, the embodiment of the legacy. And he was incredibly shrewd, ambitious, and ruthless for his age.
So he clashes with Antony, who probably thought he was the heir.
Initially, yes. But they, along with another Caesarian general, Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate in 43 BC. This one was official, unlike the first. And their first act was brutal proscriptions, killing thousands of political opponents, including the great orator Cicero, who had criticized Antony. They went after Brutus and Cassius, hunted them down, defeated and killed them at the Battle of Philippi in Greece in 42 BC. But once the assassins were gone, the triumvirate inevitably fractured. It became a struggle between Octavian and the rest, and Antony in the east.
Antony, Cleopatra.
Antony had allied himself, politically and romantically, with Cleopatra in Egypt. Octavian skillfully used Roman prejudice against Antony's Eastern decadence and his relationship with the foreign queen as propaganda.
Leading to the final showdown.
Actium, a massive naval battle in 31 BC. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Agrippa, crushed Antony and Cleopatra's forces. They fled back to Egypt, and the following year, both committed suicide as Octavian closed in on Alexandria.
So Octavian is left as the sole ruler of the Roman world.
The undisputed master. In 27 BC, the Senate grants him the title Augustus, the revered one. He carefully avoids calling himself king or dictator, instead styles himself princeps, first citizen. He maintains the illusion of the republic. The Senate still meets, consuls are elected, but all real power rests with him. This is the start of the Roman Empire, the Principate.
And Augustus built directly on Caesar's foundation.
Absolutely. Caesar had centralized power, reformed administration, shown how personal authority could override tradition. Augustus inherited that, refined it, made it permanent, institutionalized it. He had the political skill and longevity Caesar lacked to solidify the system. The empire might not have happened, or not in that way, without Caesar paving the way.
So Caesar's legacy, it's immense, isn't it? Even though he wasn't technically the first emperor.
Absolutely immense. He provided the model for that kind of centralized personal authority. His reforms, like the calendar, had lasting impact. His writing style influenced Latin literature. His name, Caesar, became the title for emperors for centuries. Think Kaiser, Tsar.
And his influence is still around in everyday things.
Definitely. Phrases we still use. Crossing the Rubicon, veni, vidi, vici, et tu brute, the month of July. Even medical terms like cesarean section, though likely misattributed. But more profoundly, his political playbook is still relevant.
How so?
Think about it. Building personal loyalty in the military, crafting a public image through propaganda, using grand gestures and bread and circuses to win popular support, seizing opportunities, bypassing established institutions, even using calculated mercy as a political tool. Leaders, for better or worse, have been studying and adapting Caesar's methods ever since. Dictators and democratic politicians alike. He's this enduring archetype of the ambitious, charismatic, revolutionary leader, the unkillable idea, as you said earlier.
So wrapping this up, we've followed Gaius Julius Caesar from his youth in a Rome tearing itself apart, through his rise as a general, his conquest of Gaul, his crossing the Rubicon, the Civil War, his brief dictatorship, and finally, his bloody assassination.
It's an incredible arc.
Yeah.
A man whose ambition was just limitless. He reshaped Rome, laid the groundwork for empire, and left a legacy that, as we've seen, is still incredibly potent thousands of years later.
He was never emperor, but maybe he was something more foundational. The man who broke the Republic and showed how one individual could dominate the state.
Exactly. His methods, his successes, his failures. They're a timeless case study in power, leadership, and the tension between personal ambition and political systems.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners. Consider that tension. Rome had this incredibly strong tradition against kingship, yet one man, through charisma, military success, and ruthless ambition, essentially dismantled the Republic. What does Caesar's story tell us about the fragility of established systems, even democratic ones, when faced with overwhelming popularity and military power concentrated in one person?
How do we balance the need for strong, decisive leadership with the need to protect institutions from being overwhelmed by individual ambition? It's a question Rome wrestled with tragically, and it's a question that feels just as relevant today. What lessons can we still draw from Caesar's rise and fall as we navigate our own times? Something to think about.